Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. Fugitive liquor baron Vijay Mallya undergoing an extradition trial over fraud and money laundering charges in India on Tuesday lost a lawsuit filed by 13 Indian banks in the UK High Court seeking to collect from him more than $1.55 billion. Judge Andrew Henshaw refused to overturn a worldwide order freezing Mallyas' assets and upheld an Indian court's ruling that the consortium of 13 Indian banks was entitled to recover funds amounting to nearly 10,300 crore rupees. The victory for the banks will enable them to enforce the Indian judgment against Mallyas' assets in England and Wales. The worldwide freezing order prevents Mallya from removing any assets from England and Wales up to that value or to in any way dispose of, deal with or diminish the value of his assets in or outside this jurisdiction. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze if this is the beginning of the end for Vijay Mallya. Joining me on the program today are Ajay, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Virendra Gupta, former Ambassador, PK Malhotra, former Secretary, Ministry of Law and Justice, and SK Verma, Secretary General, Indian Society of International Law. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Malhotra, I'd like to begin with you, of course. Let's first try and put the verdict into perspective.
I think it's a very healthy development because a time has come when social and economic offences are to be dealt with more sternly and more severely. In that direction, the present government, when it came to power, it started making laws providing strict punishment, and now the enforceability of these laws is also to be seen. Now, so far as Vijay Mallya's case is concerned, I think this is a healthy development that the commercial courts, commercial division of the UK High Court has upheld the decision and had said that the assets can be seized. Now, this is only one part of it. I think it will directly have an impact on the case of extradition which is pending before the Magistrates Court in London, and I think that extradition process will also be expedited because of this positive development which has taken place.
Sure. You know, Professor Verma, how big a blow is it for Vijay Mallya, who's taken refuge in the United Kingdom?
Yes, I think to some extent I agree with Mr. Malhotra that this has set the stage for extradition. But you see, extradition is not dependent on one particular decision because it has to be looked into the extradition treaty which India has with the United Kingdom because there are certain rules which, on the basis of which the extradition takes place, and that is that there should be double criminality, that it should be offence in India as well as in UK, and then you see it should not be political offence.
You know,
in the past,
having been said, Professor, are white-collared crimes accepted as criminal offences? How does it work?
It has been, because in the past, Dharam Teja's case, there was embezzlement and he was extradited to India. And in this particular, what I'm saying that it entirely depends whether this has been listed as a crime under the extradition treaty or not. That's most important.
Sure. Ambassador, what kind of an extradition treaty do we have with the United Kingdom? If I'm not wrong, I think we signed it way back in 1993.
Yes. Now, this extradition treaty will allow for coverage of economic offences. And we must remember that increasingly these economic offences are, have reached beyond any specific nation. There are global transactions. So I think every country is affected. And it is very much like the other scourges, other problems like terrorism and other problems. So I think the global community has to take a view, and there has to be at least an interpretation which is more helpful and which seeks to cover attempts by individuals to defraud a nation which goes beyond that particular nation.
You know, that having been said, this particular ruling of the UK High Court, what message does it send out overall, as far as the global community is concerned with regards to economic offences?
Well, that individuals can no longer take advantage of specific country laws and commit an offense in a country and escape to another country and hope to enjoy the protection, the legal protection. I think this is a real jolt. I don't think Mallya would have expected that all of that will come to naught. He would have hoped to get legal protection or at least delay this whole thing for a very long time. So I think this is a very welcome and very progressive ruling on the part of the British High Court.
Sure, sure. Mr. Dua, is the end game near as far as Vijay Mallya is concerned?
I beg to differ from my fellow panelists on this issue. I think all that has happened in yesterday's decision, or was it the day before?
Yesterday,
The commercial court, commercial division of the High Court has upheld an order passed by the Debt Recovery Tribunal in the state of Karnataka in the year 2017. An order which was passed after Mr. Mallya or Dr. Mallya had fled the shores of the country. The 13 banks from whom money had been borrowed had filed a case way back before the Debt Recovery Tribunal. Very often, the premise is that these debt recovery tribunals were not working, efficiently. Efficiently meaning expeditiously, looking at all aspects of law, taking all aspects of law in mind. They were more taken as departmental tribunals, so to say. Yesterday's judgment has upheld the order of this tribunal, which is the sanctity of an Indian court. Tribunals have legal powers. It has upheld the sanctity of an Indian court. It has also given away to the 13 public sector banks. I think almost everybody is a public sector bank. The consortium was, in one case, was led by the IDBI, in the another case by State Bank of India, that there is hope that they can recover the $1.45 billion of pounds of loan, 9,000 crores of loan which was there. I think we must see it to that, in that limited context.
Okay.
Not necessarily linking it up with the extradition process which has been initiated, which is before another court altogether, a magistrate's court, which is going into all the issues pertaining to the legal treaty between, extradition treaty between India and the UK. The question which Virendra raised about the global world, etc., must look at it, is a somewhat of a different issue, because here it's going to be purely the bilateral treaty between the two countries, and as
that's going to decide whether it's
covering or not. On top of it, considerations which have been raised by Mr. Malya's legal team, that the condition of Indian prisons is bad. All those kind of conditions, and the magistrate is looking at it. Indian government has had to file affidavits about the condition of the courts, and those
so his extradition is being looked at in a different case.
Absolutely, context. And all that has happened is a bit of a hope, saying that Mr. Mallya cannot continue to hope that not only has he fled the country, that also he doesn't have to return the money, that there is hope because of yesterday's order.
Sure.
But let's remember, yesterday's order does give him an opportunity, like any other decision, that he can go to the Court of Appeals, equivalent to our Supreme Court.
Right. That's what I wanted to come to next. Mr. Malhotra, what are Vijay Mallya's options really, and can he wriggle his way out of the trouble that he is in?
I think that's a very important question. It's not that easy for him to now wriggle out. And I would like to agree with Mr. Dua to the extent that these commercial proceedings are independent of the extradition treaty, because extradition is on an entirely different prospect, different footings. That is on the issue that CBI has filed a case against him for fraud, and the Enforcement Directorate has filed a case against him for money laundering. These charges are to be proved on a different footings. But so far as the commercial case is concerned, this has been examined by the commercial court. It's a civil liability, and now banks will be getting a right to recover their money by selling the assets which are available in UK. I think that is what, and so far as Mr. Malya's remedy is concerned, obviously he will be going to the Court of Appeal. This is the natural course of action. On legal advice he may be doing so because the court itself could have said that we give you liberty to go in a Court of Appeal, but that liberty was not given, but that option is available to Mr. Vijay Mallya. So far as the extradition process is concerned, I personally feel with the extradition treaty which was signed between India and UK in 1992 and which came into force in 1993, so far there not have been many cases under which the extradition has been allowed, because I find that the developed world generally doesn't agree to this kind of request from the developing world, and this I'm saying on the basis of handling these cases in the past, that generally this kind of relief is not granted and extradition is not permitted. But the kind of relief which we have got in this commercial matter, I personally feel that this will definitely expedite, and this will help us getting the extradition of Mr. Vijay Mallya expedited, because so far as the extradition is concerned, I think there are three basic principles which needs to be followed and which need to be proved in the court. One is that there is a prima facie case. Second is that there is an extraditable offence, and extraditable offence under the treaty is defined where the punishment is for 1 year or more, and third element is that there has to be a dual criminality. And I think all the three parameters in this case are satisfied, and once it is proved by one of the courts, that may be a commercial court, not necessarily a criminal court, which says that he has defaulted in the loans and a case for recovery is made out, probably this will definitely help the magistrate's court to arrive at a conclusion, well, here is a person who has defaulted and probably extradition is called for and the requirements are met with.
Okay, fair enough. Professor, what are the options really as far as the Indian government is concerned and the consortium of banks are concerned going forward?
See, so far as the banks are concerned, I mean, this is the first time, as I can understand, that where the British courts, they have accepted the decisions rendered by other courts, they have accepted the jurisdiction that which has been rendered, and they have accepted it. This is a positive step, and so far recovery, it is related to recovery, that in the Malya cannot sell, it is frozen.
So can the Indian banks recover then, and what is the process that they have to follow?
Then they have to in fact seek the permission of the court in that particular case. It is not that they have rendered the judgment and they have to follow the procedure as it is laid down in the British jurisdiction. So that will be taken into account. And so far as the extradition, that is entirely a different thing, which I have been saying, that there are different parameters. Some, as Mr. Malhotra has just said, that there has to be double criminality. There is a rule of speciality also, that the non-political offences must not be. And it is not, it is true that in the case of, as I mentioned, the Dharm Teja, they have extradited for embezzlement. But when he ran away again in 1978 for evading the income tax, they refused. They said it is not a crime, so we cannot extradite. So they generally, right now they have raised the issue that the prison conditions are not good. I mean, human rights, they are taking the refuge or some sort of excuse. I must say that in our Malya, the team is seeking that he should not be extradited on one ground or the other. And this it depends entirely on the magistrate. Generally that court first has to decide whether he can be extradited, he cannot
the
be.
issue is going to go on for some more time, is what you're saying?
Certainly, it is not so easy. In our own country, it takes, of course, our country takes more time, but it is not that they are just overnight, they are going to decide. There also it takes many times, many years to decide, and before
I think in the previous case it took about 23 years when an Indian national was extradited from the UK. So
no, in the case of Dharm Malya, I think he was extradited in 1971. India filed, and he was extradited in 1974. Again, when he ran away in 1978, he was never extradited.
Right.
So it depends.
Okay. Okay. You know, As far as our track record is concerned, Ambassador, as far when talking about extradition, it's very poor. It's about 36% in the last 15 years. Why is that so? Why aren't we able to bring back criminals to this country?
Well, firstly, we must see how the evolution has taken place and not necessarily go by historical precedents. As Professor said, it's a very significant development that for the first time a British court has accepted a judgment handed over by the Indian court.
So our time's changing.
Times are changing, and look, extradition is also something which has to be decided between the two governments. It's an intergovernmental treaty, and surely I think the relationship between our two countries is far more responsive. At least I would say that the British government is far more responsive to the sensitivities of the Indian government. Now, another point that I like to make is that there is considerable evidence, enough evidence which CBI can put on the table about the criminality of intent on the part of Dr. Mallya. There is, at least going by what has come out in the public domain, that he diverted funds. He was hiding facts. He asked for loan. When he got the loan disbursed, he actually sent out money abroad. So there is money laundering, very, very definite this thing. So given that kind of situation, I'm sure the extradition court, while going by the letter of the law, they will also look at the broad circumstance of how a businessman of such great repute, has sought to defraud the public money. So I don't think British people, British judicial system or British government will seek to provide any protection to a fugitive like Dr. Mallya.
Right.
Particularly when Government of India has made it very clear that they're very sensitive about and they need to recover, because he's got his assets everywhere. I was in South Africa and I know that he's got a huge game reserve there, 18,000 hectare Mabula game reserve. And he himself has a very plush residence over there. So he's got, I'm sure, properties tucked away in different parts of the world. The question is that we must reach out, and if he actually owes this money to the banks, the banks' money is, these are public sector banks. So in a sense, that money belongs to Indian public, and we must make all possible effort to recover that money.
Sure. Mr. Dua, does Vijay Mallya have to be made an example of and message sent out very clearly to other economic fugitives?
Absolutely. I have no doubt in my mind, not because he is the largest defaulter of Indian banks. Now he is actually appearing puny compared to what is coming to light subsequently. But the fact of the matter is, of late, this trend to run away from the country, flee from the country, if you are involved in a possible economic offense, a trend which was started by him, and he abused his position as a member of parliament. The kind of, probably, pardon my saying so, both probably to take the loan as a member of parliament, as well as then to leave the shores of the country. This is something which, as a public servant, he has misused his position in addition to embezzlement, money laundering, cases which have been filed against him by CBI as well as the ED. The Government of India must exercise all possible levers which it has, but at the end of the day, the governments can do, particularly in countries like the UK, which have a very established common law system in position, that government of UK's willingness to help, something which we have requested for, and we understand even at the level of the Prime Minister, such a request has been made to the British Prime Minister. It has to come out from the prosecution stand in the court.
Right.
This time, at least in the commercial court, the Crown prosecutor, that means like our public prosecutor, was on the same footing as the private lawyer also engaged by the Indian government, CBI and enforcement agencies. They had their own law firm which was assisting them. the Crown Prosecutor as well as the Indian law, or the company defending the Indian government, they acted together. It brought pressure on the court, or means the arguments were put probably more cogently than the team, the high-powered, high-paid prosecutor team of Mr. Mallya, and that's how we scored.
Right.
And going forward, and the questions what you asked was why didn't it happen? Why was it only 36% success rate earlier? Probably, I think, on the conviction with which the Crown Prosecutor would have put forward the case in the past may or may not have been of the same intensity, and also the Indian government may not have been able, considering our overall financial foreign exchange positions in the past.
Our status.
Yes, but we may not have been able to hire good law firms to represent the Indian government in the past.
Okay. Limited time on the program now. Quick closing comments from all my guests, starting with you, Mr. Malhotra. How can India ensure that economic offenders are not given safe havens abroad?
As I said in my initial comment itself, I think the times have changed. Earlier, getting an extradition in this kind of transactions was perhaps not that easy as it has become today. As Professor Verma has also pointed out, there was an extradition case at the time when income tax law was violated and we wanted extradition, but it was not allowed. But I think now the world over, whether it is a developed world, whether it is a developing world, they understand what these economic offenses mean, because economy of any country is the backbone for the economic growth, and if that is not checked properly, economic offenses are not properly checked, probably you cannot have the development in the country which you would like to have. Precisely for that reason, the government has already made certain tough laws. The countries or the courts have now become more liberal in considering this type of cases, and in case there is a violation, they ensure that the law is enforced and the person is booked under the law under which he is being dealt with. And the latest example of this is that our own country is coming out with a new bill dealing with the fugitive of economic offenders. The bill is pending in the parliament, and I think once that is also passed, maybe then the government will be getting a right to freeze all the assets of the person who indulge into the economic offences. I see this as a positive sign.
Mr. Malhotra, I'm sorry to cut you short.
I feel that the time has come when...
I'm sorry to cut you short. I've got limited time, so I'm going to get the other panelists in as well. What's the way forward, Professor?
No, I think, you see, in this particular case, certainly India's profile has grown over the period of time, and maybe that's one of the reasons that we are getting this such a positive result. But moreover, just to get such persons in the future, to get them back, we must be more careful in concluding the extradition treaties, where we should expressly put this particular clause,
right,
that these type of offences will be extraditable.
Sure, fair enough. So we need to redraw our extradition treaties is what you're suggesting. Ambassador, should we have a mechanism, some checks and balances in place that a case should not reach this level at all?
Well, the cases would reach. There are people who are intent on defrauding. I think what we need to do is to have a strong mechanism to take action against them. And I think we are on the right track. Government at the highest level, Prime Minister himself, has raised this issue at the international forums, including G20.
Sure.
So I think at India's behest, this issue of economic offense, corruption, has been given due primacy. And as Mr. Malhotra said very rightly, economic well-being is, so important to the well-being of people in a country. So I think this needs to be paid, we need to continue paying a lot of attention. And if there is an instance, we have to put the entire weight of the government, which is what is happening. I mean, in this particular instance, at the government at the highest level is interceding with the British government that, look, we are interested, we are very sensitive about this, we need your cooperation.
All right, Mr. Dua, close the show for us with the concluding remark.
I think the way a couple of years ago, when the various heads of government met in Australia, if you recall in Brisbane, to say about sharing of information with regard to black money. Black money is non-paid, on which taxes haven't been paid, and thereafter there's been considerable movement in flow of the information, exchange of data between the countries. I think the issue of extradition also must be taken up at a similar forum, which would provide for saying that the existing treaties which do not cover expeditious extradition, those would also be bilaterally reworked and accordingly made them up to date, and that will, because at the end of the day they are all justiciable.
Sure.
The courts have to decide it. So the new agreements, of course, extradition treaties have to be in line with the current requirement, but the previous ones also, once an understanding at a global level has been reached, must be made to fall in line with the requirement of the time.
All right. Well, on that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.